Welcome back to Young Heretics. I'm here wearing my Santa hat. I'm up in my brand new cozy attic office. I'm surrounded by all my books. It's cold outside. The leaves have come down off the trees. There's a quiet blanket of winter spreading across the land. And I know you're all out there thinking one thing. You think this can only possibly mean that the best season of the year has come back around. It's that time again. It's the Lent of St. Martin. Oh, was that not what you guys were excited about? Were you not thinking, oh, hooray, November, December rolls around, it's time to commemorate the Lent of St. Martin? I mean, given the kind of people that listen to Young Heretics, my beloved listeners out there, it's quite possible that a lot of you were thinking it's time for the Lent of St. Martin, or perhaps to get slightly more normcore about it, you were thinking, oh, Advent is here. But most people, obviously, around this time of year are not chomping at the bit to commemorate the quiet, contemplative, dark, fasting time of Advent. Most people are stoked about the Christmas season. And I'm not enough of a Grinch to tell people not to enjoy Christmas all through the month of December. I too enjoy a good Advent calendar. Mine has whiskey in it, not chocolate. That's a real thing, by the way, but only a little bit every day. Don't worry. Anyway, some people will tell you, like, you know, it's commercializing and corrupt and secular and evil to celebrate Christmas full bore before December 25th. And what we really ought to be doing is prayer, alms and fasting and penance during this season. We've lost the true meaning of the season. I won't go that far with you. As I will get into in a little bit, am also a secular Christmas enjoyer as well as a liturgical Christmas enjoyer. But here on Young Heretics, part of the point of this show is to open up a deeper, richer, older way of thinking about the world and understanding your place in time and space, and understanding the generations that have gone before us and how we can connect to that deeper past. And so every year around this time, I like to do a little Advent special where we talk about some of the stuff that would have gone into celebrating this season, commemorating, marking, and anticipating the birth of Jesus for the early church and for the church triumphant throughout history, time, and space. And so that's something that I want to talk about today. I called it the Lent of St. Martin because in way, way olden times, going way, way back, this season has been connected with the Feast of St. Martin, who's one of the saints of the early church. St. Martin of Tours in France, a soldier who famously gave up half of his cloak for a shivering beggar. This is something we covered actually on a previous Advent special. So if you want to go back in time through the YouTube or the Apple Podcast archives, you can listen to me talk about that and kind of the structure of Advent and the history of it overall. This time I want to talk about one very specific element of Advent, and that is the music. Because one of the big obstacles to celebrating Advent for a lot of people is that what we really want to be doing at this time is playing Christmas carols. In my family, we have a very strict rule, which is you can only play Christmas carols once Santa Claus reaches, I think it's 42nd Street in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I may be getting the geography of that right, but basically after the Thanksgiving Day Parade is over, you can ask my sister Faith about exactly how the tradition works over at her podcast, Storytime for Grown-Ups. But we, as traditionally secular Christmas enjoyers, we instantly put on the Bing Crosby record the minute that happens, or the King Singers, or Pentatonics, or whatever thing we are most excited to listen to for that year. We have held back, restrained ourselves from even humming or noodling around with Christmas carols up until that moment. The one exception being that if you're singing in a choir, you can rehearse before then, but you cannot sing or perform or listen to Christmas carols until December. And so when December comes, you want to just let it rip, right? And go charging ahead into your favorite Christmas playlist. And that is something which definitely makes the Christmas season feel like it has started. In church, on the other hand, if you go to church during this time, you may notice that even though a lot of the great Christmas carols are also hymns, they're not singing them right around this time. You're not getting a ton of, "O come, let us adore him." You're not getting a ton of "Angels we have heard on high." I mean, you might be, depending on the church, but in what they call high church kinds of liturgy, that is more formal traditional liturgies, you'll typically wait until actual Christmas Day. Maybe you'll have a few of them sprinkled in, but basically instead you will be singing Advent carols. And at this point, everyone that's a fan of Advent, that loves this season of expectation and waiting, will say, "Oh, don't play Christmas music yet. There's all these Advent carols that we get to sing first. We have to wait and sing this Advent music." And then they're like, "O come, Emmanuel." And that's basically it. Now, I do want to suggest to you that O come, Emmanuel is actually even more of a banger than you think it is, and is one way of getting into the liturgical history of this season. So I'm going to tell you today all about the history of this, my favorite, objectively the best Advent carol, O come, Emmanuel, and that's going to dovetail with my other Advent season preoccupation, and which is during Advent, we read Old English poetry. I can't explain why this is. I don't make the rules. I just know that when fall hits, I instantly start feeling in my bones the desire to crack open a big, weathered, maybe vellum tome and read Beowulf or some great poem from the Anglo-Saxon tradition. I just think fall and winter is kind of the season that's most easily associated with some of that, the sounds and the feeling and the mood of those Arthurian legends and all that stuff. And so this is also going to be a little excursion into the wild and wonderful history of Old English poetry via a history of this awesome Advent carol, O come, Emmanuel, which in some form or another goes back at least to the 8th century, as we're going to discover. It's rooted in 8th century ritual in the church. It comes into its Latin form as early as the 12th century, and then it's translated into English in the form we now sing it in the 19th century. So that's where you get it. If you know, O come, Emmanuel, but the actual structure of the hymn, the content of it, the meaning of it is rooted way, way further back than that. And so I'm going to kind of lay the table for you so that now when you go into church during Advent, if you do, you'll understand a little bit more maybe about what's going on. This is coming out at a good time because it's here to kind of prepare you for what's called the late Advent weekdays, which is the kind of last few services leading up to the actual coming of Christmas. And I will say, for once, I will be dogmatic about this. This season is not a time for low church shenanigans. Usually I'm a very ecumenical kind of guy. I think that Christ and the Holy Trinity is something that can be accessed in a number of different worship modes. I personally, being myself a Protestant, think that the Protestant Reformation was something that had to happen in the course of history and that has contributed wonderfully to a revitalization of the church and of theology. However, having said all of that, at heart, I'm what they call a high church Anglican. That is, I'm somebody who likes the smells and bells, the rituals and the celebration and the kind of pomp and circumstance. And I think that ritual is a kind of inescapable part of worship, so you ought to make it beautiful. And like I said, usually I'm not there to say that that's the only way that you can possibly worship or experience God or whatever. But at this time of year, I will hear of nothing else. I will not hear this protest against the ritual and the beauty and the kind of solemnities of the church. Because if ever there was a time when even people that object to liturgy would want to get involved in it, it's this time. Everybody has something traditional that they do at Christmas. It's something that connects us to year upon year upon year of our own personal past. We get together with family, right? And family connects us across the generations. And so I would suggest that there's actually something essential in this moment about ritual and tradition. And that goes, importantly, even for people that are not religious. I know that I have a lot of religious listeners, but I also have a lot of listeners who let me know that they are kind of maybe learning more about religion through this podcast, or they haven't like been to church in a while, or they just are totally uninterested in it as an idea. But like, one of the things that I keep harping on is, even if you have never ever thought about God before, or you've never felt any kind of need to reflect deeply on that, if you want to understand the civilization that we live in, that is the West, broadly construed as this grand tradition of ideas and history that's been passed down, it benefits you to have an understanding of the Bible and of all of the wisdom traditions that have emerged out of it, because you can't even fully understand the English language unless you know some of the phrases that we've taken out of the King James Bible especially. But there's so much more to it than that. I mean, the way that our culture is rooted in, among other things, Christian theology and Christian history is inescapably deep. It's just everywhere around you. And the more you understand about it, the more you can meaningfully engage with it, even if that engagement doesn't currently take the form of religious worship. So this moment right now, this season, is actually a really good time, a really good moment to get a kind of on-ramp into church tradition and into understanding church tradition, even if you are not a regular churchgoer. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One of them is that this is Christians' most popular cultural export, right? Advent into Christmas, this season of winter, and lighting up this season of winter with the joy of this celebration is one of the most brilliant PR moves the church ever accomplished. Obviously, I think it's more than a PR move, but among other things, it has percolated out into the national and the global culture in such a way that there is something people clearly connect to about it. And I think it has to do with that sense of tradition that every year when the winter comes and the summer ends and we're kind of sliding down into the darker part of the year, we get reflective, we think about the passage of time. And as our friend Kamala Harris reminds us, there is great significance to the passage of time, right? We note and mark the passing of the year. We note how things have changed over time. It's not necessarily exclusively a happy thing, right? Sometimes we reflect on people we've lost. It can be very difficult. And all of that goes into this particular poignant emotional stew that is already there for us, I think, written into the rhythm of the year. The calendar itself kind of invites us into these sorts of reflections, at least in the hemisphere where it gets dark around this time of year, right? There's something kind of different about it, say, in Australia, but here, at least, we are around this time, around winter, we are kind of drawn by nature herself into these reflections on our own mortality, on history, on the way that we've grown and changed, and good things that we've shared with our family, but also things we've lost, right? Yearnings that we have, things that still aren't complete, or things that we wish had been different, right? All of that is like there in this moment. And I think that the season of Advent, the season of leading up to Christmas, it actually embodies that in the most perfect possible way. And it folds that into the grand narrative of the Bible, right? The history of the Jewish people leading up to the birth of the Messiah in Jesus is basically presented at Advent as the final kind of picture of this yearning. It's basically saying you've always known in your heart that there were these yearnings, right? You've always felt these yearnings when you come around to this time of year. Well, this is the story. This is the cosmic architecture that makes sense out of all of that. And so it's a really easy way to have an on-ramp into understanding kind of what the liturgical year is all about, the story and the history and the theology that it's designed to express, because it's connecting to you at a very tender place, right? It's hitting you right where you feel it most. And so I think that makes it a really great, easy on-ramp, right? If you are trying to get into the Jerusalem side of the West, right? Athens and Jerusalem make up the West. How do you get into the Jerusalem side? Well, there's never been a better time than Advent. So first and foremost, right? What is Advent? What is this season? What are we looking at? I've talked about this a little bit before on previous episodes, but just to recap, right? This is the season that is leading up to Christmas, and Christmas has taken place on December the 25th for quite some time. So it has been in this season for a long time, at least since the 4th century AD. There's a document called the Chronograph of 354, which is this big compilation of sort of timekeeping texts, right? Calendars and other things about time and how time passes and organizations of time. And it comes from 354 AD, and it notes the date of Christmas, the celebration of Christ's birth, being on December 25th. So this is something that's been around for a very long time. Why is that? Well, unlike Easter, Christmas doesn't have a definite date set in the Bible. Easter is different. Easter is actually kind of the linchpin of the Christian year. It's the pinnacle of the liturgical year. And it takes place on Passover, which was a celebration, a festival that had already been set. The date is already there in the Bible before the New Testament, before Jesus comes along. And he's basically going to a Passover celebration, festival, or what have you, ceremony when he goes to be crucified. And so Easter you can pretty easily peg to a certain time of year, and that's still roughly the time of year when it takes place. Christmas is different. Christmas doesn't have that kind of easy, neat marker for where it ought to be. And there's been a lot of theology done. People have waved their hands around and done theology at this problem in a number of ways, including reckoning in kind of cosmological terms. Well, if Mary conceived at a certain date that was the date of, say, the creation of the earth or the making of light, the people link it, say, to Genesis 1 and the creation narrative and so forth. But the easiest way to understand this, I think, in the way that St. Augustine really emphasizes and kind of, again, gets us closest to the thing that we're most familiar with, is to say this is the time when the light is least, right? We're leading towards the winter solstice, which is when there is less and less daylight until we hit the solstice, and then it starts to grow and grow and grow. And December 25th isn't exactly the winter solstice, but it's around there. And the idea is Christ enters the world. God, the Messiah, the Savior, right? This one that we've been waiting for this whole time in this grand narrative of history, enters the world at a time when things seem darkest. And this is a theme which goes right back to the beginning of the Bible and to the story that the Bible tells more generally about history and salvation. Again and again throughout the Bible, you have these inclinations that mankind has strayed from God. We have fallen, right? In the Garden of Eden, famously ate the apple. Not a good deal, right? Things got broken. Now we have sin and problems and death in the world. And this causes all sorts of complications and difficulties, and things get worse and worse and worse, and people mess things up worse and worse and worse until at the worst possible moment, God enters in, right? And this is something that the Jewish people had kind of experienced on a historical level through the exile in Babylon before the birth of Christ. There was a catastrophic disaster in the exile in Babylon where Jerusalem was conquered, and that was supposed to be kind of the end of the Jewish people in many ways. That should have been kind of the failure of the Jewish experiment, but instead it became the source of a lot of Jewish ritual and theology. And the exile became actually a time of great suffering, but also of great renewal. And so this is taken in Christian theology as a kind of symbol, or sometimes we say a type, right? A prefiguration of the way God intervenes to save mankind. And if that's true, if we believe that, then we will see that in our lives, right? In small ways and big ways, that it's always darkest before the dawn, right? And so the placing of Christmas in this dark period of the year kind of makes sense with that, right? It says, well, the year itself is almost a symbol or an image that's etched across time of the grand story that we're all a part of. And that's why it makes sense for Jesus to have been born in this time when the light seems darkest, and now it's going to start to grow and grow and grow, just as little baby Jesus is about to grow and grow and grow. Advent is the time of waiting for that birth. And something that I've been reflecting on a lot this year is that we typically talk about Advent as a time when Jesus is not yet here, right? And it's a time for reflecting on the fact that all the things we want and hope for haven't yet come to be. The world is still imperfect. There's still war and strife and sin, right? And we kind of can connect with that and mourn over that. And all of that is true, but it's not technically the case that Advent is when Jesus is absent from the story. That is, we're not remembering the parts of the Bible where Jesus hasn't been incarnated yet. It's actually the time when Jesus is in embryo. That is, what happens during Advent is we remember the Annunciation when Gabriel comes to to announce to Mary that she will conceive and bear a son. And then from then on, we're remembering the parts of the story where Mary is pregnant. And that's actually, to me, an even more intense and powerful idea, that it's not we're waiting for a God who isn't here yet. It's that we are traveling with or meditating upon the possibility that what looks like absence might actually be pregnancy, right? That the womb is not empty, though the tomb soon will be, right? That this is actually a season of preparing for Christ's birth, but preparing by reflecting on, like, what are the ways in which the current situation might contain the seeds of something greater, which is, among other things, just a really effective sort of approach to life. It's something that people have pointed this out before, but the fact that this idea is built deeply into the Jewish scriptural tradition is part of what has made the Jewish people so successful, right? Throughout history, is this idea that, like, when things are falling apart, you look inward and you ask, well, like, what is my responsibility for this? And how can this disaster be the raw materials for building back better, as they say? It was a very Biden-centric episode for some reason. But anyway, how can that happen, right? And the idea that Advent is the time of Mary's pregnancy is also kind of related to that. It's also the beginning of the liturgical year. And it's about not only the coming of Jesus, the coming of God to earth in the incarnation, but also looking forward to the second coming, which is the one that hasn't happened yet, right? So Adventus, the Latin word where we get Advent, means the arrival or the presence, right? Advenio in Latin means I come to you, or I'm arriving. So Adventus, Advent, is the time of presence. And the kind of Greek analog for this is parousia, being with, right? Being present with. And interestingly, in Greek, if you say, hey, deutere parousia, right? The second being with, or the second presence, that's the phrase that we translate as the second coming. So this is Advent. Christmas and the recollection of the incarnation is like the first coming, and the second coming is the end of the world, is the return of Christ in triumph after the resurrection to reign, which in traditional Christian theology, we're still waiting for, right? So in Jewish theology, we're still waiting for the first Advent, right? We're still waiting for the coming of the Messiah, the anointed one of God on earth, right? In Christian theology, that's happened already in history, and that was the birth of Jesus, the incarnation and the crucifixion and so forth, the whole kind of central story of Christianity. So we're still waiting now for the second coming, which is the end of the world. And both of those moments are like overlaid onto one another. Time is a flat circle. It becomes a kind of loop in the Christian idea that we had this little moment, this human life-sized embodied moment of what everything is all about. And that was in the incarnation, right? And in God's sort of sanctifying humanity by his presence in and among us. And then the ultimate kind of cosmic version of that is going to happen somehow all over the universe at the second coming. So we have it in like embryo here and now, and then we also kind of think about it as the coming that will end the whole world. So the liturgical year ends with what's called Christ the King Sunday, which is Christ reigning over the whole universe, and begins with Advent. So it is kind of like a layering of these two things, these two moments over one another. And the idea is, like, we sometimes talk about already not yet, right? This is the truth. And yet there are all these ways in which we are still kind of waiting. Creation groans, as St. Paul says, with labor pains, right? That's Advent. That's the theme of the story and the way that it is kind of structured. The reason that it's here and now is because this is a time when people naturally turn to these kinds of themes in their own lives, right? I think this is one kind of underappreciated reason why Christmas is the Christian holiday that has really caught on all over the world with everybody, is because it's viscerally, immediately connected to the way that the year unfolds and the way that our hearts connect to the universe. Now, as a Christian, you'll say, yeah, well, that's because it's the true story, right? It's the story that's written at every level of creation. A cynic, a cold-hearted Grinch, a grumpy Scrooge would say that, well, that's just, Christians using these natural truths to sort of like sell their wares, to hawk their propaganda. Your mileage may vary. Obviously, for me, I find this a plausible depiction of reality at the highest possible level, in part because it is inscribed at every different layer of being, of our existence and our relationship to the world. Anyway, you pays your money and you takes your choice. Here we are at Advent, and as I said, we're leading up to these final days when, among other things, if you go into church, you will hear sung what are called the O Antiphons, sung or recited. And the O Antiphons are the core of the O Come Emmanuel lyrics. They're where those lyrics come from. And they are basically just a sequence of little verses, little recitations or meditations that people say. You might even call them, in modern speech, you might think of them as affirmations, right? These are things, or at least invitations, right? These are ways that people ask for God to enter into the world, right? This is a way of expressing or kind of like focusing in on things that are part of this season, things that we hope for, things that we look for and yearn for in this moment. An antiphon is another Greek word. It comes from antiphone. Anti, nowadays, if you say something, you're anti something, you mean you're against it. But in Greek, it means a whole bunch of things, including like opposite or answering, right? Similar kind of to the Latin contra. Now, if you're contrary or if you counter something, then that means you're pushing back against it. But you can also have kind of like point counterpoint as a way of balancing out two different answering ideas. An antiphone is an answering voice. It's a voice or a refrain that you say, in this case, before and after a kind of main song. So the antiphon in the liturgy is, you sometimes see it kind of marked out either with like a star, or sometimes they'll say like antif or something. And these ones, the O antiphons, go before and after the gospel canticle at Vespers. And basically that means the evening service, sometimes called evensong in the Anglican tradition. The evening service goes up to a canticle, which is a sung part or a song that comes from the Gospels. And at Vespers or at evening, it's the Magnificat. My soul doth magnify the Lord. My spirit hath exalted in God, my Savior, etc., etc. This is what the song that Mary sings when she learns that she's going to give birth to Christ. So obviously it's a very key text for this moment. It's always recited or sung at evensong or Vespers, but the antiphon, that is the thing that you recite beforehand and afterward, changes throughout the seasons. So you'll come to the part where you're about to do the Magnificat if you go to one of these services, and you will say something, some one sentence, and then you'll repeat that sentence at the end of the Magnificat. So it'll be antiphon, Magnificat, antiphon, and that's where the O antiphons at the end of Advent are going to come in. These are the texts that go back at least to the 8th century. So the church has been putting these in this place for a very, very long time. They're kind of core meditations. If you are familiar with like the Zen Buddhist tradition, they're sort of like koans, right? They're like these repeated things that we come back to every year and try to like dig more meaning out of. The tradition of antiphonal singing goes even further back in the church. We have this wonderful story from the historian Socrates of Constantinople, 5th century historian. And he writes about Ignatius of Antioch, who was the 3rd bishop of Syria. And he says, Ignatius of Antioch had a vision of angels singing hymns to the Trinity in antiphons. And he passed over the pattern from his vision to the church in Antioch. So the contention here, the claim, right, is that the angels are singing in this way somehow. You might think of in the prophecy of Isaiah, the angels singing, holy, 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 back and forth to one another, that there's something shared or kind of dialogue or relationship that is inherent in the structure of even the highest kinds of worship, right? Even the worship that goes interdimensionally beyond anything that we can currently see or touch with our senses, right? This is somehow supposed to embody or express that. And there's all sorts of ways you could imagine that to be true, right? The antiphon is a kind of relationship. It's like I say this and then you say that back, right? There is like a kind of at least two-part form to this, which means that all worship is like fundamentally relational. It's about like what you're saying to God and about God. It's also about what you're saying to other people. Love God and love your neighbor. So antiphonal singing is like baked very deep into the whole Christian idea about the world and about God. And these antiphons, the O antiphons, which we sing or recite around the Magnificat at the end of Advent, are also like really, really, really old, basically. And therefore, there must be something in them. And in fact, they are very, very beautiful. One thing I've done for this episode is I've translated the Latin texts of the O antiphons. You can find them online. So this is not like something that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. But like I always say when we did the Aeneid and when we do epic and ancient literature more generally, it's a helpful practice to kind of translate, if you can, and get back to the text itself and meditate on some of the meanings and how to express them in English. So there aren't that many of them and there aren't that long. So I'm just going to go through them and we'll talk about kind of what each one means. And then we'll talk about some of the stuff that they've inspired leading up to O Come Emmanuel. So these are names. Each antiphon is a name of Jesus. And what's clever, I think, about them, what's really brilliant, is that each name of Christ is also a name of God, of course, because Christ is God in Christian theology. But it links Jesus to sort of the cosmic foundations of the world. It then links him to the history of the Jewish people, and then it links him to kind of what we want out of him now, right? What's Jesus ever done for me, right? Comes at the end. And so it's O come, then you get a name of Jesus, and then you get like a way that this principle or this aspect of Jesus and of God structures the universe. You get a way that's been seen throughout church history, ancient church history, and then you get a way that this might like take shape here and now, and it might have meaningful effects upon our lives. So the first one is O Sapientia, O Wisdom. And wisdom is like a very mystical and important concept in all of theology. It's also obviously, a big deal in philosophy, which is the love of wisdom. But the sapientia or the sophia or the chokmah of God is like an ordering principle that runs through all of existence. So on December 17th, you sing to Jesus as O Wisdom, O Sapientia, a wisdom who came forth from the mouth of the Most High, stretching from end to end, strongly and sweetly ordering all, come to teach us the way of prudence. So all of these have this format, right? O Wisdom who came forth from the mouth of the Most High. That's Genesis 1, right? That's the opening text of the Bible, basically, that God speaks, and his speech is somehow an ordering or governing principle of like the very laws of physics. I always think when I read Genesis 1 of like the words that are coming out of God's mouth are in some sense the Schrödinger equations, or they're whatever deeper order and logic is expressed in the phenomena that we order with our most advanced mathematics. And so the sapientia, the wisdom of God, is also, of course, the logos, the word of God, which is the Greek idea of like this kind of cosmic order that stretches from end to end, as it says, and strongly and sweetly orders all things. This is also invoking passages from the prophecy of Isaiah, which is a major, major text for this season, right? Isaiah is the prophet who foretold the whole Babylonian exile thing and talked about how it would lead to the coming of the Messiah, lay the stage for the coming of the Messiah. And so that's also a very important sort of like hinge point that these texts are referring back to. And then come teach us the way of prudence. That word's very carefully chosen. This is about, right, announcing that these antiphons are going to bring that whole cosmic story, that whole like history of the creation down to the Babylonian exile and onto this moment, right? They're going to bring that into this very concrete and small scale application to our lives, which of course is what the incarnation does, right? The incarnation is the embodiment in a person of all that other stuff that we've been talking about. And so come teach us the way of prudence. Prudence is the virtue that instructs us in like, okay, I have these general principles. For example, I think that people should be free, right? That they have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the sort of wisdom or the general idea. Prudence would be, well, what kind of tax code does that mean I should write? How should we manage our borders, right? Like this is these practical applications. And so already in this first antiphon, you kind of have contained like the whole theology of Advent, stretching back to Genesis 1, to the creation of the world. God said, let there be light, on through the Babylonian exile and the ordering of history, down into this little concrete space, almost as small, you might say, as a baby's crib, right? That occupies our lives, that sort of operates here and now. The next one, the December 18th antiphon, is O Adonai. And this is the one of the Hebrew names for God. Adonai is the thing that you say. Well, it is something that the God is often called. It just means my Lord. And it's a way that Jewish people address God. It's also a way that many other cultures at the time addressed their gods. Baal just means Lord, right? So Bali is another way that like other gods were addressed. But when the Jewish people said Adonai to God, they meant like you God are my Lord. And the name, the person or the entity that they were addressing with that phrase Adonai was what we would call Yahweh, right? Or Jehovah. These are all kind of ways of getting at this four-letter name that God has. Yud He Vav He, YHWH. Observant Jews don't even pronounce this name, which is why Adonai often stands in its place. But it is written in the Bible. And so this is basically like, oh, God of the Jews, right? Oh, that God that the Jews addressed as Adonai, as distinct from Baal and Ashtaroth and Ishtar and Marduk, etc., right? Oh, Adonai, Dux et Dux Domus Israel, and leader of the house of Israel, who appeared to Moses in the burn of the bush's flame and gave the law in Sinai, come to redeem us with an outstretched arm. So, okay, here we've got God of the Jews, right? That is the one true God, the God who revealed himself in history as distinct from all other gods. You shall have no other God but me, and who became the God of a specific people, right? Who called Moses out of Egypt and led the Jews out of Egypt, come to redeem us. So we're reminded of this part in history where that drama was acted out, right, in the story of Exodus. And then come to redeem us is like, we have our own sort of bondage. Traditionally in the Christian theology, this is bondage to sin. Personally, as an individual, you might at this point ask, like, what are the things that I feel like are controlling my life, right? Those are ways in which like God has yet to break through. And so this prayer is like, come and yank me out of that, right? Like, give me a hand up out of whatever quicksand I'm in, just like you did for Moses, just as it is your kind of nature to do as Adonai, as the God of the Jews. That's the 18th one, December 18th. December 19th, O Radix Jesse, or Yesse, O root of Jesse, Jesse the father of King David. So we're up now, we've moved on from Moses into the Davidic period, or just before the Davidic period. And this, of course, is the line, the kingship and the descent that Jesus is in. And this is one of the prophecies that Jesus has held to have answered, is this prophecy that one day a king will be descended from the line of David. And crucially, in the Babylonian exile, that line is cut off, or the kings of David, the kings who sat on Jerusalem's throne, the kings of Judah and Jerusalem, are cut off. And so in Isaiah, you get all these images of a shoot springing up from the stump of Jesse, and the holy seed is its stump, right? This is something that comes up again and again in Isaiah. It's this image that, again, everything's gone wrong, right? The tree has been cut off, but now in that renewal, there will be a new shoot that springs up. And so the root of Jesse is like the source of life that comes up even through the supposedly dead tree, right? O root of Jesse, who stand as an emblem of the people, before whom kings will hold their tongue, whom nations will beseech, come to set us free, and do not delay. This is a revolutionary one. I think this one is really cool because there's a lot of stuff in the Psalms and in the Bible generally that like the Messiah will conquer nations. And famously, Jesus did not do this politically, at least in the moment, right? He submitted instead to being executed. And so a lot of people hoped he would conquer the Roman people, who would rise up for the Jews and take over Israel or rebel against the Roman Empire. He didn't do that. Instead, he submitted unto death. But in so doing, he created this other kind of freedom. And I think this idea that like, that was the thing before which kings shall truly hold their tongue. First of all, it has become true for many nations that they have become Christian in the wake of this event. But even more profoundly, there is this idea that has been embodied by many Christian martyrs that if you are following Jesus, right, if you're trying to do what is right in the eyes of God, you will at sometimes resist even the full authority of the state. There's a long history of debate about this and how that should take place, right? But basically, this is known as the freedom of Christ, which is why come to set us free, right? Set us free from fear of earthly rulers, fear of men, and instead make us inheritors of the line of Jesse, the line of David, which is like true kingship and freedom, not of this world. So that's the 19th one, O root of Jesse. Then December 20th, O clavis David, the key of David, and scepter of the house of Israel, who opens and no one can close, who closes and no one can open. Come and lead the captive from the prison house, where he sits in darkness and the shadow of death. By the way, you can hear in each of these a lot of echoes of what we get in the eventual text of O come Emmanuel, right? O root of Jesse, O come thou root of Jesse's tree, right? Key of David, another classic image to open and close what nobody can shut or reopen, right? Come and lead the captive from the prison house. So again, this idea of like whatever you are in bondage to you are set free of it. That's the image for the 19th. No, it's the 20th, of December. The 21st, O Oriens, O Eastern Dawn. Sometimes this is translated as day spring. But just this idea that like in the East, the light is renewed, right? This happens again and again in the Bible. It's again a natural kind of symbolism that's built in anywhere you are on Earth, right? With, I guess, like the exception of the very North Pole and the South Pole, right? The sun rises in the East. Like there is no human alive who hasn't seen the sun rise in the East at some point. And so this is just built into our natural experience of the world, that the light is renewed at the dawn of each new day. And Christ is that dawn, right? This is also in another of the canticles, that the dawn from on high shall break upon us. Here's the antiphon, O Eastern dawn, the splendor of eternal light and sun of justice, come and shine on those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. Again, very primal imagery here that like nobody doesn't understand, right? We've obviously, like, there are blind people who've never seen the light rise, but they've felt the warmth right there. Everyone has some kind of access to this basic imagery of light and darkness. It's obviously associated with good and evil. It's associated with death and life. All of this stuff is like just kind of really easy symbolism. Like it's sort of naturally accessible. And the sun of justice rising over an earth that is in darkness, right? These are obviously like easy prayers to pray, both for the world and individually. On the 22nd, O King of the Nations, O Rex Gentium, King of the Nations and their heart's desire and cornerstone, who make both one, come and save mankind, which you have formed from clay. This one is a little like interesting. It's complicated. King of the Nations, right? We've talked about this already, the idea that like all people rightly owe allegiance to God, who is like the ordering power behind all things. Even kings have to believe in and care about justice and these sort of absolute ideals of good and evil. But also the heart's desire of the nation. So this is not just like a top-down kind of ordering principle that the kings have to obey. It's also a bottom-up yearning, right, that comes from our heart. And we have this like natural response, which again, if you think about the way we respond or feel as the year progresses, it's really true. Like the world is structured in a certain way, but we are structured in a certain way too. And even if we try to avoid it or ignore it, we do feel this like answering pull in our hearts. And so then the antiphon goes on, God is the cornerstone who makes both one. I think this is like sort of saying he's the meeting point between the structure of our hearts and the structure of the world, right? That's what the incarnation is too. It's this lining up alignment between the stuff between like the Schrodinger equations, between, the way that the universe and the physics of the world hangs together and the artistry of that, and the rhythms of our hearts and the yearnings of our hearts. And of course, Jesus is famously the stone that was rejected that shall become the cornerstone. So come and save mankind, which you have formed from clay. So we are dust of the earth, but we also have this formation or this structure in us that is part of God's design. That's there as well. Finally, December 23rd, the last one, O Emmanuel, Rex et legifer noster, expectatio gentium et salvator earum, veni ad salvandum nos Domine Deus noster. You'll notice that I'm pronouncing the hard V rather than the W if you're a Latin nerd. Church Latin, you typically do say salvator rather than salvator. O Emmanuel, O God with us, King and our lawgiver. The thing the nations are waiting for, right? Expectation of the nations and their salvation. Come to save us, God our Lord, Domine Deus noster. King and lawgiver, expectation. I mean, this is sort of a summation of everything, but this is where you get the famous Emmanuel. O come, Emmanuel, Hebrew word meaning God with us. And this is another thing that like the Messiah is supposed to be, in some way, the like embodiment or the like manifestation of God in the world of sight and sound and sense. It's clear how Christians think Jesus is that, right? He is this human being whose life embodies what God is and what God wants for us and all of that. Come to save us, God our Lord. So incredibly rich short texts, right? Filled with like the whole theology of the Christian tradition in just a few short days. And this is why I say it's kind of a good on-ramp. It's like you could spend a lot of time, as we have just spent a little bit of time, right? Like studying these antiphons, breaking them down into their pieces. And it would be a little education in Christian theology and in what Christians think the universe means. I know that's a big claim, and I know that we're sort of discouraged from thinking about capital M meaning in the whole structure of things. But on the other hand, like we cry out, right? We yearn for some meaning and sense to our lives. And the world, despite being very chaotic, also shows signs of order. So this is like a time for meditating on that too. Like what are the hints in the world that you can follow that will lead you out of your imprisonment and toward what you were meant to be, right? It's like, it's funny, like these are questions that we all ask, but we're kind of embarrassed to ask them. Like, how can I live a better life? How can I be more true to what I know in my heart I'm supposed to be? Because you're not supposed to be spending 5 hours a day scrolling TikTok, right? You know that you're not supposed to be lazing around or, constantly fighting with your spouse or whatever other thing, like drinking yourself into oblivion. You can try to escape that like moral code that's written into your heart, but it's still there. And so one thing that Advent does is say like, yeah, it's there for a reason. It's a little miniature code that describes how the whole universe is structured. And if you live into that, then the universe will answer back, right? There is a cornerstone between the law of nations and the yearnings of the heart. And that is also what Advent is about. In the first Advent, first coming, it's about that. It's about Christ, the embodied incarnate Son of God, as like sign and symbol of that. And then in the second coming, it's about the revelation that this is true from top to bottom, right? Everywhere in the world and in the universe. From the the spin of an electron all the way up to the drama of a human life. Finally, just a little bit of Old English poetry because I couldn't resist. I've mentioned a couple times that these O antiphons are the source for the lyrics of O Come Emmanuel. They are also the source for some of our best Old English poetry, I think. And this is the Exeter book. So if you are interested in Old English poetry, the first thing you will probably hear about is Beowulf, right? And then if you get more interested in that, you will start to hear like other poems that are written in the same style and in the same language, this alliterative Old English style. And if you like some of this stuff, I would really recommend a book called Winters in the World by Eleanor Parker, one of the books I read this year about Old English poetry and about the way of describing the seasons that Old English sort of gives you access to. I'm going to do another episode before the year is up where I give the famous Inkling Awards to the best books I read this year. Winters in the World is definitely in the running. But for now, just to say, this is where I'm getting some of this. And I'm also getting it from the Exeter Cathedral Library, because that's where this thing called the Exeter Book lives. It's a 10th century anthology of poetry in Old English. And it was written down by one scribe around 970 AD. So it's been around for a very long time. It was a gift to Exeter Cathedral by the first bishop of Exeter, Leofric, at the turn of the 11th century. And it's one of only 4 known poetic manuscripts of Old English. So many Old English texts in prose, but only 4 in poetry. There's Beowulf. There's 2 other manuscripts, the Junius manuscript and the Vericelli book in Italy. And then there's the Exeter book, which is this compilation of things. And it's damaged, but huge. Like there's a lot of material. It's arguably the oldest book of English literature in the entire world. And it contains these wonderful poems called the Advent Lyrics. They're also sometimes referred to as Christ 1, because there are 3 sequences. There are 3 poems in here, Christ 1, Christ 2, and Christ 3, and they seem to progress through the liturgical year. And the Advent Lyrics are the first. And they are, again, tagged keyed to the O Antiphons. So each of these names of Christ that I've just gone through inspires some of the Advent lyrics. And then there are others that are kind of threaded in there that are that don't seem to be from those antiphons, but from other ones. But anyway, this is also, if you want to read these, you should go to a website called the Old English Poetry Project. But the wonderful, I don't actually know her in any other way, but she's translated this. Her name is Dr. Ophelia Erin Hostetter. These are old poems, and so the English that they are written in is really not readily accessible. But they are full of fascinating and imaginative riffs on these themes, just like O Come Emmanuel. I just want to read one of them to you because I find it really amazing. This is actually not from the O Antiphons directly, but it is part of the Advent story, and that's a little drama that the poet has imagined between Joseph and Mary when Mary tells Joseph that she's pregnant with Jesus. And in the Bible, it's briefly mentioned that Joseph considers putting her away quietly, that is, divorcing her, or rather calling off their engagement. But then an angel comes to him in a dream and tells him, no, don't worry, this is God's doing, right? This is this is not infidelity, right? This is something else, a miracle. But this poem, which is lines 164 to 213 of the Advent lyrics, is like a domestic drama at the level of a soap opera. Like it's really richly and daringly imagined, because there's just a lot of pain in it. Like the poet has sort of entered into how this interaction might have gone, and given us this little exchange. How can I forgive this hateful speech, says Joseph, right? He's really hurt. Or find any answer in reply to the wrathful. It is widely known that I took on from the bright temple of the Lord a free-born and clean virgin without blot. And now everything is changed by I don't know who. He's saying, look, what are people going to say, right? They're going to find out that you, Mary, are pregnant. How can I find any answer in reply to the wrathful? What am I going to say to them? neither course avails me at all, to speak up or to be silent. If I tell the truth, the daughter of David must die, losing her life through stones. The situation is even stronger if I should cover up her crime. The perjurer must live afterwards, hated by all peoples, abominated by men. He's saying either I have to lie or tell the truth, and that either dooms me or you. This is, of course, eventually resolved by the fact that this is Jesus, right, and the visitation of the angel. But what I love about this poem is that it's brave enough to hold off on that happy ending for a little while, which is something modern Christians aren't always so good at, right? We like to skip to the part where it turns out it's Jesus and everything's fine. But Advent is actually about the part before you're certain, or where that's still taking shape. And this poem, this little drama from the Advent lyrics, is about how that can be an extremely uncomfortable and difficult journey, right? It's not all about theological certainties. It's not all about knowing how the story ends. It's also about it's the antiphon, right? Like, oh come Emmanuel isn't just, how great that God's going to be with us. It can be that. And certainly there's like great comfort in that, but it's also like, it's not there yet, right? Like, and I don't understand how this is supposed to work. And so the anguish of Joseph in this moment, like changed by, I don't know, everything is changed by, I don't know who. I love that line. This is the Advent lyrics are full of stuff like this. So again, if you're interested, go check it out. Go check out the O Antiphons, certainly, and do not sleep on the season of Advent with its famous Advent carol, O Come Emmanuel. Hopefully this has given you a little bit more access into that wherever you currently are in relation to the liturgy. If you are like a, well-traveled, well-seasoned Christian worshiper, or you're somebody that like doesn't know anything about this stuff, hopefully this is kind of a little map of what this season is about. And if you like start to pull on that thread, this is like a many, many centuries long tradition with full of riches and little discoveries like this one that I had never read the Advent lyrics until this year. So coming back to this, there's always new stuff to discover, and I hope you will. Speaking of which, speaking of what you guys are up to this year, let's do a mailbag question. I put out a call on Substack at rejoiceevermore.substack.com for Advent-related mailbag questions. That's where you can get in touch with me most readily, is if you want to send me a DM there through the Rejoice Evermore Substack. And in this case, I have this chat with my subscribers, and I put out a call for that. And I got a question from Jennifer about, she says, getting flack for not decorating for Christmas. So this is about, I think, what I was talking about at the beginning, that like December comes and everyone is really eager to just plow on ahead to Christmas mood, and your mileage may vary, right? Like not everybody is ready for that. You have to kind of make some space for this Advent stuff if you really want to experience the full meaning of the season. Jennifer writes, the materialistic culture pushes for Christmas ASAP and then wants it over by dawn on December 26th. Make room for the next purchasing opportunity of reform yourself, dieting merchandise. What is your response to those who criticize us as not in the spirit when we refrain from decorating and celebrating early? Well, a couple things. First of all, the season is a Christian season. So like the Christian liturgy determines how it goes. It's like, it's sort of like coming over to somebody's house and telling them they've put their painting on the wrong wall. It's like, hold on, buddy, this is my house. Like the whole order and architecture of it is structured by me. So like, if you want to participate, by all means, and do it however you want, but don't tell Christians don't like Christian-splain Christianity or liturgy-splain Christianity to Christians. That seems weird in and of itself. As I said, I am a little bit of a squish about Christian traditions. I tend to blend Advent stuff with the more secular holiday because I think like it's only good if people experience the Christian holiday as a time of joy and light in the darkness, and even maybe a little bit of nostalgia and longing, right? That mix, the proprietary Christmas blend, if you like, is accessible to all people. That's what has made it so powerful. And I think that like the fact that it's an on-ramp to the Christian tradition is just in general a good thing. So I would suggest like not getting down on other people for the way they encounter and meet this season. Like everyone is coming at it from a different place. Obviously, they shouldn't be telling you how to do it either. But I do tend to be more of an open-minded guy, and I myself really enjoy the lead up and the Christmas parties. But I would say if you are doing full Advent, right? If you're not doing any carols up until the 25th, and if you're at least trying like me to engage with Advent in some way and wait until the 25th for the full celebration, then I think it's really important to do the other thing you said, and that is keep celebrating Christmas. So the flip side of Advent and of delaying Christmas until December 25th is that there is then a Christmas season. It lasts for 12 days, and that famously is a song, right? The 12 Days of Christmas. So if you're going to wait all the way for that delayed gratification, you also you should enjoy it, right? I think also as Christians, we have a way of being really excited about self-denial, and that is part of the tradition, and it's countercultural, and it pushes back against a lot of the other stuff that consumerist culture, as you say, tends to foist upon us. But when the joy comes, it's joy, man. Enjoy it, So celebrate, keep your decorations all the way up through the new year, up until January 6th, which is not first and foremost Insurrection Day, but Epiphany, right? Another church holiday. So I think dig into the fullness of the mystery and the expectation and the kind of weirdness of this season. And then make sure that you also follow up with the reward for yourself and for others. It's not just about, I'm not going to do Christmas until the 25th. It's about, I am going to do Christmas until the 6th, which actually fits, I think, better with the year, because one of the things that happens if you just do secular Christmas on the 25th and you don't move on, or rather you move straight on into and now it's New Year's and it's just back, is you then have a really long stretch of winter to kind of sit through, right? One thing you could say to people who give you a hard time for doing Advent and then a longer Christmas is okay, have fun slogging through January and February, right? Famously the worst time of the year, unless you are still celebrating, unless that's a season of kind of joyous excitement about the thing that you've been waiting for the whole time. So all in all, I would say the liturgical way fits better and actually is more fun in the long run, and certainly richer. But also don't forget that everyone is kind of coming at this from we all have personal histories that connect us to both the secular world and the religious world. And one of the things that Christianity has historically been really good at is engaging with the way that the world outside experiences some of the truths of the Christian liturgy, right? This is how the pagans were Christianized, is priests went out and they said, yeah, you can see certain basic philosophical realities because creation expresses them. Here's how you take that and elevate it to the level of pure cosmic truth, right? So rather than being this evil, nasty Christmas that is only secular and that is so commercialist, it's oh yeah, these are basic, good things that people are responding to about the Christmas season. How can you take that one step further and make it profound? And the answer is the liturgy. The answer is the liturgical calendar and Advent. A very happy Advent to you and yours. I will be back one more time before the end of the year with my awards for the best books that I read this year. But until then, enjoy the season to the fullest. And I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.